Tenemos la verdad que para nosotros en el programa de Género e Inclusión de la Universidad Iberoamericana Ciudad de México, Tijuana, hoy es un día de gran alegría. Han sido 4 años de ir construyendo y viendo crecer esta iniciativa con el apoyo de muchas organizaciones, universidades, la importancia de llevar esta iniciativa a cabo y que confiaron en hacerlo junto con nosotros. Agradecemos la verdad muchísimo su confianza, su apoyo.
We thank you so much for your support. And we also thank the university, the training division of the university for their support. And we thank everyone for organizing this very important meeting. And Professor Telles and Engineer Reina, thank you so much for everything. Yes. We've been working for about 2 years now on this, and we want to thank everyone for their support and the trust they have placed on us and our work. And the team, thank you so much. Enormous support from everyone. Thank you. And we also thank Dr. Ana Maria Berruecos, who's here with us, and the before and now program people, everyone. We want to thank everyone for being here, everyone participating in this 4-year initiative. Thank you so much for your support and your trust. This would not be possible without you. Now, let's begin with the opening session. Can you hear me? She's asking, can you hear me? I think I'm being cut off a little bit, right? So then we are being told that our president of the university will not be able to be with us today. So, Mrs. Telles, Araceli Telles, will be in this opening session, this inaugural session with us. She will be giving the keynote address to start our meeting today. Very well, thank you. We're so happy to have you here. We're so glad this moment has arrived, finally. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in this very important event we're beginning today. Can we give the floor to Araceli Telles? Can we? Let's see. Just a minute, please. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me, everyone? Is that going through all right? I was not able to open my microphone, but now I am. All right. I want to also thank everyone, all the different organizations, everyone who's made this possible. This 4th Congress on Peace Building from a Gender Perspective. What an impressive effort this has been. Thank you so much. The president has just told us, force majeure, he cannot be with us. But let me read his message. So I will be reading what he has prepared for us today. Good morning, everyone. The Ibero-American University is so pleased to welcome all of you. This 4th Peace Building from a Gender Perspective Congress. Peace research tells us that peace is not just the absence of violence or war. It includes unlimited respect for human rights and the promotion and teaching of ethics, protecting men and women equitably, and peaceful transformation process of conflicts at the personal, group, community, and international levels. And the Company of Jesus, peace building has always been right at the core of our work. That's why the decree points out, I quote, our education activities at all levels, our research, social research centers have to help men and women who are committed with reconciliation to overcome obstacles in life and to find solutions. Thus, Decree 14 of General Congregation, we express concern for the rights of men and women. It is urgent to promote justice in many cultures and countries of the world in terms of women, taking into account feminization of poverty and the feminine face of oppression. We have to be solidary with women through, for instance, explicitly teaching equality between men and women through colleges and universities, supporting women liberations movement so that they may become professionals and participate in public life, and also fighting against violence on women. We know that as of the passing of Resolution 1325 of the United Nations Women, Peace and Security 25 years ago, recognizing the importance of looking into the impact of armed conflicts and the impact this has on women and girls. We are also talking about peace building and gender perspective. Thus, we also recognize what was done in 2008, 2010, showing the world the gravity, the seriousness of sexual hostility and violence against human peace and peace in the world. In 2015, that was the deadline for the SDGs, compliance of SDGs. It has to do with the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing. And this was passed years before in Resolution 1325, opening new possibilities for dialogue among countries, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. This has to do with peace, justice, and gender equity. Thus, considering this very close relationship, let me also say what Dr. Carmen Magayon has already said, and Dr. Manuela Meza in her memoirs of the previous meeting we held, answering the question, what does this type of Congress contribute? How can we contribute to peace building from a gender perspective? What impact are we having? Well, in spite of anything that we can just say, in terms of manipulations on the gender concept, this perspective constitutes greater inclusion of women. We know universality is a horizon we all want to have, a very desirable horizon without exclusion, inclusion of women, of indigenous women, of hegemonic powers, also respecting this. Third, with the vitality of including these conceptions, this is an open door. We should be considering human diversity that has been excluded for so many years. End of quote. Dr. Mesa tells us that the Open Congress is a space of reflection to share important experiences and differential impact of violent conflicts and the impact these conflicts have on men and women. So this initiative should be developed in the Latin American environment, one of the most violent regions of the planet, but also one of the most important labs of peace building from a gender perspective. This is the end of my quote from Dr. Mesa. So peace building has to do with development with human rights, gender equity, and allow women to live a violence-free life. And this has to do with social education, and this has to do with Jesus' company, the company of Jesus that we represent. And since the first version in 2017, we've been trying to have an impact on social reality of our country and thus be able to boost the transforming role of our teachers in our university, to generate places of dialogue with society, for us to have a critical reflection, which is also interdisciplinary, for a more free, solidary, and fair, inclusive, and peaceful society. Additionally, this meeting has and has always had the support of different organizations convening this type of event, education institutions that belong to our Company of Jesus. For instance, the Center of Research at Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security, the Spain Research Center, and also human rights organizations and institutions, ITESO, CENEP, which is the peace program, with a peace program of Colombia, and the peace building program of other universities that are participating, and also the University of Barcelona, the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and also the Catalan Institute for Peace, the International Institute of Restorative Justice, Organization of Peace of Monaco, and many other Spanish institutions. Mexico's participating through many institutions that have always been working with us, and also other institutions, for instance, the one we have in Granada, with which we've been working for so many, many years, as well as institutions in Ecuador, among many others. We want to thank all these universities and organizations. I want to express our gratitude for their commitment and support. Especially, I want to thank the General Directorate of our university, because they've been so creative supporting us in this activity. Finally, all I have to say is to thank the presence of our lecturers, our speakers. I wish great success for your event, with great lessons for the university community and for our country. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the words of the president of the Iberoamericana University. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate, and thank you so much to all of you for participating. This is a search we all have for peace building from a gender perspective. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Great success to your event. Thank you so much for this wonderful message, for these wonderful words. We want to thank the Ibero University for all their support. Let's see. Dr. Sandra Blasco is a historian and political scientist, member of the Women International League for Peace and Freedom, WLPF, from Spain. We cordially welcome Dr. Blasco. Thank you for being with us. You have the floor, madam. Thank you so much. I want to thank the Iberoamericana University for inviting us to participate in this very important fourth meeting on peace building from a gender perspective. And thank you so much, Dr. Elvia Gonzalez de Pliego, for coordinating a lot of the work of this meeting. I am going to be sharing my screen. I hope you can see it. Yes. Can you hear me? We'll be talking about genealogy of women for peace, the history of women for peace, first half of the 20th century in Spain and Latin America. Since the beginning of the 20th century, women from different walks of life have been organizing themselves. in order to address conflicts and defend their political and social rights. This has to do with feminism, peaceful feminism, pacifist feminism, and it has to do with protesting against the use of force to solve conflicts. They've been saying for so many decades that this can be done in a peaceful manner, in a positive manner. Peace, not only as the absence of war, but also social justice and well-being. That's what these women meant by the term peace. Dr. Magayon and myself started a research project trying to recover the political cultural past of those two lines of thought, peace and feminism in our country. They hadn't been researched before. We wanted to know the relationship of Spanish pacifists, peace workers, and the impact on society. This means that at the beginning of the 20th century, there were three international women organizations: International Council of Women, International Women's Against War, and the International Women's Organization. So it was like the grandmother, the daughter, and the granddaughter. That was the relationship among those three organizations that were doing international work. The last one incorporated peace as the political objective par excellence. This is the Hague First International Women's Congress, 1915, First World War. You see this crowd of women of so many countries, and they had the conviction of working for peace in a continent at war. They defended the paradigm of international relations against relations that maintained war was the only solution. This is what gave the name of that organization, the Women's League. In our research, we decided to mainly work on Spain, but we were also looking into the need of expanding our research project because we realized there was so much commitment and participation of women in all 5 continents. So this is a complex networking that has been established among women in different continents. Our research could not just be limited to our own context. It was very important to remember the sisterhood between Spanish and Latin American women with sometimes common language, taking into account political, cultural, and social elements. I will talk about Spanish women working for peace in this context. After that, my colleague will be talking about women working for peace in Latin America. We want to contribute to recovering the memory of our past, incorporating women with no names, women who've made so many historic contributions, and talk about their lives and their commitment. We want to pay attention to various elements that gave way to this participation, the condition of women, their participation in international politics and diplomacy, and arbitration work that they also participated in, and how they had an impact on domestic policies and international policies as well. For some time, people in Spain thought that the right of women to vote was quite a delayed solution. However, once women started participating in the voting process, they decided, well, we have to be well informed. In this sense, I will talk about pioneer women, the suffragettes, women who participated politically, incorporating a feminist perspective in their work. 3 cities had peaceful organizations, Valencia, Barcelona, and Madrid. Let me tell you about women in the peace movement at that time and the work they did at the beginning of the 20th century. I will be talking about the important work they did. First of all, I will talk about women who worked for peace in the first part of the 20th century till the end of the First World War. I will talk about the 20s and the relationship of women and the work they did.
I would also talk about the context of Spain in the context with respect to the rights for women and the development of the organization. At the beginning of the 20th century, before World War I, in Valencia, the first groups of women arose against the colonial war, first in Cuba and later on in Morocco. The first women that would sign up in this free thought, women that wanted to take their opinion and their position against patriotism. I'm going to speak about Ana and Amalia Castillo or Ángeles López de Ayala. In 1896, there was one of the first cases of the first movement of women, 5 of them whom were later called those who defended peace, were publicly positioned against the war of Spain in Cuba, and they went to jail in Valencia. Among those that were detained, Ana and Amalia Castillo Bernal were detained, who founded in Valencia the Women's Association. Amalia and Ana Castillo were related with the free thought in Masonry, and there were feminists and pacifists, which main activity was developed in Valencia. Ángeles López de Ayala was a journalist and a writer, and she was very well known at the beginning of the 20th century. She wrote different speeches, and she participated in different speeches against the war in Morocco. In 1907, protesting against the colonial war, Ángeles López de Ayala praised maternity at a very high level, and I quote, defending the country of their mother, I'm the mother, and I'm the mother myself. Pacifist and free thought women like her were aware of what happened beyond our borders, and we knew that not necessarily they traveled, but they knew about what was going on throughout the world through letters and different articles that were published in different journals. This is Society Concepción Arenal in a journal. In the context of the big war, the feminism in Valencia used this prior experience to reactivate the movement of women for peace and connecting internationally. Along with Ángeles López de Ayala, Ana and Amalia Castillo Bernal created the journal Redención. And along with the different writers in the journal, they founded the Society Concepción Arenal. This was the first Spanish association that has a history of being in International Congress in 1929, and they joined different groups. In the context of the big wars, María Lejárraga, writer, feminist from Rioja, and who lived in Madrid, She agreed with all of the founders of the group in the Hague Convention in 1915, and this was the basis for the organization. Ryder would traveled often. She lived in Brussels and Paris, and she knew what was going on in the world through the international journals and press. As a matter of fact, in his book, Feminism, she makes a reference to this Congress in a detailed manner. She speaks about the different speeches. She praises the bravery of different women with all the responsibility in taking their own position. And I quote, "Men are at blame of most of the wars, but women are not exempt of responsibility. We have failed our responsibilities in different ways. Number one, we have educated our men with heroism and with a false idea of heroism. Number two, we have not praised all enough effort to save our peoples. Also, the war is going to be over once and for all. We know this. Peace is the first item in our program." Now I'm going to speak about feminist organizations in the 1920s. I'm going to talk about Barcelona and two women that were very important in this city in the context of interwars, Teresa Claremont and Carmen Clar. Teresa Claremont was one of the most important activists, and she was a weaver, and she was a very important speaker. Carmen Carr, she was a writer, feminist, and one of those that made social reform and one of the key figures in this feminist movement. In 1921, Carmen Carr created Acción Femenina, Feminine Action, that was defined as an organization for the promotion of feminine interests that would work for the defense of political interest. Acción Femenina would defend the right for vote for women and would bring together women with different political trends, liberals like Carmen Carr to some others. The organization knew about the international activities and also the members. They had already participated at Carmen Carr in the creation of a pacifist committee that also participated in 1915 in the Hague Congress. Acción Femenina, following the different activities for peace that started a decade earlier, moved forward with the contest with the International League for Women. In December 1921, Elena Landazzo from Mexico spoke at a conference in Barcelona entitled International League of Women for Peace and Freedom. That's how we found out that Elena Landazzo arrived in Spain. In this way, we can see that Spain got closer with this movement from Latin America through Elena Landazzo. We know that at the end of 1929, because of a Congress Pro Society of Nations that took place in San Sebastián in Madrid, the Spanish League for Peace was born. And a few months later, in 1930, in Catalonia, another group was created. The Feminine League for Peace and Freedom. And she was the leader was an actress and a journalist, the first woman to lead it, president of this league. She was appointed minister of the Second Republic in exile, and after the Republican group went down, she was exiled in Mexico. She was a feminist activist. She was a partner, and she got to this place, and she was the president, and she was the speaker for the Catalonian group. The birth of both organizations was gathered in the history of this organization by the Atrubashi and Margaret teams. The authors have mentioned that in the Congress of Tagore, we found that in the prior Congress, there were new sections, and there are groups, Cuba, Yugoslavia, and others. I'm going to go to the third item in the 30s. For this, we have to talk about the context of the Second Republic in Spain, 1931 to 1936. The Second Spanish Republic, for many women, that was like a breath of fresh air, and that they were current during the prior years. The Republic was the political context that allowed to implement the reivindication of class and gender that placed Spain as an advanced country. It brought equality that the feminists in the 20th have yearned for, the different reforms, abolition of other problems, the right to vote. The new constitution of 1931 in Article 25 said that it could not be legal privilege nor nature, affiliation, social class, gender, or political ideas. The right to vote, access to education, and the same conditions were part of the groups of women. In this new stage, women renewed their beliefs in pacifism for the emancipation of women. And this happened with the coup d'etat, military coup d'etat. In this context, the Second Spanish Republic, where these groups, they simplified the international political actions that were developed at that time. I want to underscore the conference for the unarming in 1932 in Geneva. Between 1931 and February 1932, there were two activities that mark the activity of the pacifist movement. And then the campaign for unarmament. The campaign for unarmed forces was very important. This conference took more than 6 years in taking place, with a lot of problems due to the political and economic context in Europe. The economic depression in 1929, fascism, and the invasions by Japan, international uncertainty because of the lack of efficacy in order to bring together all the European countries. Pacifist associations, mixed religious associations, and different women associations, they participated collectively in this conference. It's significant that in the opening ceremony, the organizations of women, they had gathered more than 8 million signatures. The participation in Catalonia for freedom took place at the beginning of the 1931, when Anna Nison went to Barcelona as a liaison for both organizations. La Yuba wrote a document where they show their commitment with the international movements, and they joined the campaign pro-disarmament. They gather signatures in February 1932 with the date proposed in 1932, and they congratulate the team led for their commitment. In the international politics, as well as the group for women for peace in Spain, we find after 1933 with Hitler going into power, as well as with the invasion of Italy in Ethiopia. There were years of growing progressively with the thought of stopping the armed war. In many years where Spain gave priority of women joining against fascism. In the United States, they created the Committee of Women Against War, and this committee was formed by women of different ideas, socialists that coordinated with the special group against fascism and the president in France in order to create a group in the Iberian Peninsula against fascism. We know that they organized a congress in the summer of 1934 with important women in Spain, Isabel de Alazaba, Dolores Ibarra, and some other key figures of feminism and peace movement in Spain and in the world. July 1936, the civil war started in Spain. The same month, the offices of the Spanish League was taken over. So the group of women there were things done against them. A lot of them were not able to go back to their country, and they were exiled. Some, as you know, stayed in Mexico, one of the very few countries that took them, where these feminist and pacifist women could be saved at. Some of them, like Isabel Ayarzábal, who I have for research, they dedicated their autobiography to the land of freedom that for her and for many people from Spain that represented being in Mexico. The first few years in Mexico City in the 40s, she was writing different articles and she was lecturing about Democrats, the democracy and peace, and things that she was not able to do in her country. I want to close my participation with the comments that she dedicates in her biography. And she says, for Mexico, true land of freedom for our thousands of Spaniards. And we thank the Committee of Health for Spain and to all of them for their kindness. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a la doctora Sandra.
Thank you, Dr. Sandra, for her wonderful presentation. Now we're going to give the floor to Dr. Carmen Magayon Puerto. She has a PhD in physical science with the program of history and philosophy in the School of Physics and a certificate program in philosophy, and also a professor for arts and humanities. She's a professor, and she has been a professor in different institutes in the University of Zaragoza. She was at the head of the group for investigation for peace, and she is now the chair. She's co-founder of the Interdisciplinary Center for Studies of Women, CIEN, at the University of Zaragoza. She's an editor of En Pie de Paz journal from 1986 to 2001. She was at the Council for War Register International from 1998 to 2001 and co-founder of Women in Black in the 90s in Spain. She was elected president or chair in Elected España until 2019, and she's honorably president. She is an honorable member of the Real Academy of Wealth. She has been awarded the Order of Peace Martin Luther King at the Polytechnical University in Nicaragua in Managua in 2013, Memorial 123 for Peace by Institute Victor Sextia, by the University of La Paz in Barcelona. And she has been adopted by the city of Zaragoza in 2019. Welcome, Carmen. Thank you, Dr. Elvia. Thank you, Ms. Araceli Tellers, Professor Araceli Tellers. Thank you for the words of the president of the university. Thank you for giving us space and giving the authority to take place for this Congress that has become a reference for peace building from this gender perspective. Gender inclusive perspective. Of course, Dr. Elvia González del Pliego has been here. Thank you for inviting us to this opening ceremony. And Dr. Blasco, we have worked for years. I'm here in the to bring you our greetings from our center, a center for research in the Compañía de Jesús and the government of Aragon and the Parliament and the International League of Women for Peace and Freedom in the section for Spain. And it's very difficult to take care of all of this because we can include a lot of women of Feminists for Peace. But let's think that always in history, there have been women that have worked against war. We have Disistrata, with those women that decided to go on a strike for sex until men stop going to war. Today is a historical case, and that was a story before the historical case by Carmen Garcia Herrero from the University of Zaragoza. It's the case of the Queen Maria de Castilla that in 1429, when the armies from Navarre and Aragon were going to fight against Castilla, she just stood in the middle of the place where the battle was going to take place. Okay, but we're going to refer to the last century when feminism was born. Some authors talk about this at a time in the middle of the 19th Declaration of Seneca Force, and it happens that that social movement organized by women to work for the rights, lack of rights of women, we know and we call it a structural violence and symbolic violence in such a way that the birth of this movement really is for the defense of the rights, is against violence, and therefore from its birth is pacifist, even though it was not called that way. I would like to I would like to refer to women that before feminism, they started working on this, like Olympia de Gouges, who wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and female citizens, talking about freedom, equality in France for women. And because of this, she was taken to the guillotine. And I wanted to bring this forward because she was taken to the guillotine 300 years ago on November 3rd in 1793. So we can remember her. Mary Wollstonecraft also was, she wrote the Vindication for the Rights of Women. If we go to the closest movement, Dr. Blasco has mentioned how this movement of women with the International Council of Women, then the Alliance for Voting, and then the League of Women for Peace and Freedom. This pacifist feminism as a movement is born with women that got organized so they could have an influence in international policies that was in the hands of a lot of men that were taking the countries to war. This would be the turning point that we would mark as the moment when a pacifist feminism was born, and with the notion of equality. And the pacifists are talking about an equality to define peace and war. This is something that is broadened so they couldn't vote, but they're part of the international politics after the resolutions of such Congress in The Hague. We also have to say that to make this genealogy visible does not mean that we share the things that are essential and that we could see often in the 20th century, where female nature and pacifist virtues were together. Voters back there used that argument for vote. They said that when women were voting, they were going to vote for peace. It has not been proved as such, but back then, there were some feminists that were pacifists that were not in agreement, like Berta von Suttner, that was a recipient of the first Nobel Peace Prize. And I quote what she said: some people think that women are hostile to war and just by nature, but they're mistaken. Only progressive women, the ones that have been capable to educate themselves in its social awareness, that have had the strength of not being fascinated by this type of institutions, can find the energy to oppose this. We always say this: peace is not natural in women. Some take it, some don't. Fortunately, it's more feminists for peace than the ones that are not for peace, fortunately. What I'm going to do in my presentation is basically to underscore that in this feminism until the 30s or 40s, within the feminist organization, the purpose of peace was a common objective, as it has been said before, by the period that was lived of constant war. I will also mention some feminists, and I would limit myself to the other countries in Latin America because Latin America is huge. Who were these women that were organized in a network of international movement? Well, yes, these millions of women that were all over the world, were the leaders. They lived and responded to a pattern that was about the belonging to the middle class with the possibilities of traveling. And they spoke different languages. They could attend congresses. And that was basic to just to talk to other people. They communicate to each other by letters or journals or bulletins. They were linked to this international network of women. Among them, we have the organizers of the first feminist organizations that pioneered. They were pioneers, and this is something that happens in Europe and the United States. They were pioneers that organized the feminist movements in their countries. They're also pioneer in access to academy and to the professions, to education, to the university. And we have to mention that women from Argentina, Mexico, and Uruguay, they were ahead of Spaniards in going into the large international feminist organizations and setting and starting friendship with other women from other countries. These leaders belong to, wealthy class and the elite in North America that descended from European immigrants. They had a lot more possibilities than the middle class. And in Spain, it was different with most of the women. Most women in Latin America, as well as in Spain, they were in poverty, and they just lack of many things. Another factor in Latin America is that they were so close to the United States, and that seemed an opportunity to establish relationships, particularly through the ones that are abundant. They travel to that country to finish their school, their education. They can find other women there because feminist organizations have offices open. They organize the gatherings, and this way they connect with each other through projects and projects that are very particular. In particular, it would be very important Pan American conferences where women from the West that were excluded from the official invitations, they decided to get organized on their own. This pacifist feminism had, you know, different levels and different, it was expressed differently in different levels. Peace was something that was shared, but the problems and the cultures were different.
And of course, this meant that it was not easy to get organized. We have to remember that the relationship between women of North and South of the Americas had so much goodwill, but they also had many difficulties, especially at the Mexico home. We see that there were many disagreements with Mexico, especially because they had the North American neighbor, and many feminists had different positions on feminism and peace, especially in the United States. And African American women also had their own position. We can classify different trends, a liberal pacifist discourse, and more anti-imperialist, anti-militarist discourse, depending on the group of women you would study. The Second World War had an impact on this international network of women, and the position against war, and this was a cross-cutting objective, but especially it affected those who lived, in this case, the First World War, and the United States as well at war. So then it is logical that at the international level, this was mainly comprised of the participation of these women. And as already said here, there were other women, other feminists in Latin America and Spain. So my presentation will highlight some of those experiences, women working for the same causes, the right to vote, suffragism, and peace. And as already said, in Spain and Latin America, priority was given to education, claims, even before women's right to vote. Let me start with the Argentine case, because the Argentine case is the first country organizing in 1910, the beginning of the last century. In Argentina, they organized an International Women's Congress. Well, this is really quite impressive because in 1910 in Spain, women were just going into universities under equal conditions, but in Argentina, there was a women's association at the university level. They organized this Congress, especially feminists. They were all Alicia Moreno, who's Lieta Lanteri. They all belonged to Argentine university societies, and they organized this Women's Congress. That I will not go into great detail. It is very interesting. We have documents on it, and it was the 100th anniversary in 2010. So at that time, they were not calling it a feminist Congress. They called it a feminine Congress. In that meeting, they spoke about many problems of women with working conditions, but also the objective was to establish ties among women of the world. They were aware of this, and they were all united. And they were talking about the context they lived in, peace and peaceful solutions to solve conflicts among countries. They spoke about labor conditions, working conditions, sexual issues, and they spoke about children. In that Congress, Menendez Arraga, a Spanish woman, participated. She was being persecuted in Spain, and she traveled to Latin America. She lived in Uruguay in those years. She was a free thinker, and free thinkers are important in pacifism, as Sandra already mentioned. She explained her own experience, the experience of women in Spain, how they were against their children being drafted for the war of Morocco and the Philippines in Spain. She had seen how the children of poor women were cannon fodder. What was at stake were the interests of the wealthy classes. This cannon fodder term was used throughout this century and last century as well. So that meeting in Argentina, this International Feminine Congress in Buenos Aires, passed a declaration saying that all women should be united to work in favor of universal peace, for the arbitration principle to be used in international affairs as well as in other challenging situations, so that education of children would be granted and imparted in the same direction. And this is something we're still fighting for in our time. Uruguay now. In the 1910 Congress in Argentina, the women of Uruguay participated in big numbers. Argentina was a pioneer, but Uruguay was a fascinating pioneer as well. A lot of those women were very active. They were pioneer in passing a divorce law and also establishing a welfare state. The most relevant figure of Uruguay is Paulina Lucy, perhaps the Latin American woman with the highest international recognition in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Paulina Lucy was her name. Let me see if I can show you her photograph. I want to show you her face so that you can see her. A woman from Uruguay that was very active in this movement. There she is, Paulina Lucy Janicki. She is the only woman among the men there. One of the first doctors in Latin America, and since the beginning, from Uruguay, they requested to be part of the Permanent Peace International Committee, a Dutch committee created by women in 1915. We do not know, as it was in Spain, if they could travel to congresses, but they would be communicating with each other through letters. She is the daughter of ultra free thinkers, an Italian mason, a journalist, and a French teacher, were her parents. Impressive accomplishments of Paulina Lucy at the Uruguayan level and internationally. She was a gynecologist in 1909, and she taught at the university prophylactic education. And this position was created just for her at the university level. Another important thing is that Paulina Lucy was also highly acknowledged by her contemporary colleagues. The Uruguayan government asked her to represent her country in international meetings. In fact, she was the first Latin American woman to participate and to represent a government in the Society of Nations before the United Nations was created. She was the delegate in the meeting of youth and children against the human trafficking of women and children up to 1932. She was a friend of women from all over the world, Portuguese women and women in the United States. In this disarmament conference in 1932 that was already mentioned a few minutes ago, Paulina Lucy was one of the first women attending as an official delegate to that meeting. We could say so many things about her. I just want to invite you to do more research on this very important woman. She was a universal feminist, and she still is. She has to be acknowledged for that. Let us now go on to Mexico. In Mexico, what can I tell you on this? You know more about Mexico than myself, of course. I'm going to be very modest in my comments and giving you these names in terms of their connection with international networks. Feminist debate started in Mexico in 1916. In congresses in the Yucatan Peninsula, the most important topics were secular education and political citizenry of women. Also controversial issues, for instance, birth control and divorce, were dealt with in Mexico. In 1916, Mexican women and Spanish women placed education right at the core of their vindications. This is Dr. Gabriela Cano said and has studied. This doesn't mean that the voting rights were absent from their fight. Elena Torres, Elena Landazuri, and Elenarismendi, yes. Arismendi, Elenarismendi, yes. I could give you so much information on each one of them, but I don't have enough time for that. Elena Torres, an educator of the Mexican Communist Party, a feminist. She was highly committed with improving education and improving worker situation. She studied 1 year at Columbia University in New York in 1924, and she was advisor of UNESCO. In Mexican women, we see the impact they have had on international organizations. In 1919, she founded the Mexican Feminist Council. This is the organization of the WIF women, and they connected with Mexico, and they published a magazine called La Mujer, the Woman. Elena Torres would be a regular writer. I quote, "Feminism will transform the social world. That's why feminism has no borders. It constitutes the success of right over force. And this results in also equality." There were, end of quote, excellent wishes. And later on, Elena Landazuri, an anthropologist, had even closer relations with women from other countries. She had been the secretary of Manuel Gambio, a very important Mexican anthropologist, and she had worked with him at the beginning of the studies done on the Teotihuacan Valley. Her story, her history are impressive. After studying Mexico, she studied arts and philosophy in Mexico. Then she went to the United States. She lived in Chicago in the same house that Jane Addams had created. She was international with, this was Full House, where people would come, especially poor workers, also organizing cultural activities. And Elena Landazuri became aware of the difficult situation of Mexican migrants in the United States, because a lot of Mexican workers would be arriving in the United States. They were undocumented workers and they didn't speak English. They didn't have a privileged situation that she had. Her life was changed through this experience with the migrants of her country in the United States. This experience of living with Jane Addams allowed her to know the history of different congresses. So Elena Landazuri became the ideal woman to develop the League of Women for Peace and Liberty in Mexico, for peace and freedom in Mexico. And at the beginning of the 20s, she went to a Congress in Europe, and she went through Spain for that. And she gave some conferences in Barcelona and the International League of Women for Peace and Freedom. So she started inviting Spanish women into this organization. And the rest is so much details that I cannot go into right now. But between the Mexican women and the US women, there were many disagreements, especially on oil and what the US women saw as nationalism. In 1922, the United States were in various countries, Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Panama, and the Dominican Republic. They were occupying those countries. They were saying this was for European powers not to go into those countries because they wanted to defend and promote democracy in those Latin American countries and Caribbean countries as well. It was really just defending economic and financial interests of US investors. That's what this was all about. WIF was one of the organizations criticizing imperialism with a lot of energy. This didn't mean that paternalism and racism were not present in their strategies at that point, especially in the 20s, and also in the behaviors of some of their members, of their women members in the Pan American Congresses they organized. There was one in Baltimore, 1922, with the participation of Elena Torres and other Mexican women. Well, the United States women were interested in supporting those conferences to promote women's diplomacy and to try to soften the confrontation, the clashes derived from US policies. So this conference had the participation of 22 Latin American women, Elena Torres, and 7 more Mexican women. And with Landazuri, they presented a document to talk about exploitation of Mexican workers in US companies. This memorandum referring to the oil situation, and you know this very well, better than myself, Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution sets forth that subsoil of Mexico belongs to Mexico. It is Mexico's property. And this was, of course, what the US saw as a threat to have oil reserves nationalized in Mexico. But the Baltimore agenda did not go into issues proposed by the Mexican delegation or issues related to US militarism in Latin American and Caribbean countries. So this meant disagreements between the relationship of US and Mexican women. And Elena Landazuri left this organization. Some women from the United States continued traveling, but they were saying that the Mexican problem was that Mexico was too nationalist. That's what they called Mexico, a nationalist country. A lot of nationalism, they said, in Mexico. And the US women thought the European war had taken place because of nationalist issues. At any rate, although they thought the only path to peace was resigning nationalism, that was their position. But on the Mexican side, things were seen in a different manner. Mexico saw aggression from the United States at different levels. There were other perspectives. The French women at WIF, for instance, they said, well, we've gone through a war, and this was shown in 1924 in a Congress where they spoke about Mexican oil, and they defended Mexicans' position and the right Mexico had to defend its natural resources and the interests of its own country. And then things evolved, and with other groups, there was another campaign for the United States not to intervene militarily in Mexico. This is in the 20s of last century. That allowed for this partnership between women of the US and Mexico to move forward. Now, the Feminist League for Peace and Freedom is full of conflict. The history of this league is full of conflicts. And conflicts are normal among human beings and countries. The problem is not the conflict. How are they managed? How is the conflict managed? That's the main thing. Are they managed through an intelligent attitude of compassion, as someone has said? That's important for us to analyze. Let us now go. No, before going on to another country, let me talk about Elenarismendi. This is a book written by Gabriela Cano, as you can see on your screen. Yes, she teaches at the University of Guadalajara. You can get her book, which is so interesting. She sent it to me. And this was a discovery. I love biographies and histories and stories of women in other centuries and women of our own century and our times. Elenarismendi also fought against the war with a feminist inspiration. She had high commitment with people or men wounded at war. She was a nurse and created the White Cross. This is an organization caring for the wounded, regardless of the group they participated in or the group they were fighting for. And you can read her biography. It is really fabulous. Let us now mention some of the names that were internationally known: Margarita Robles de Mendoza and Amalia Castillo León from Mexico. The first one participated in the Inter-American Commission of Women, which is the first international organization to improve the status of women in the American continent. And she created another organization called American Women. And the slogan was the following: America, women's partnership showing immediate action against armamentism, the arms race. This is a very necessary activity in our times, and this is very, very important. Very well. This organization was working with a council, a Cuban woman, and Venezuelan women, and they were transnational organizations. Very well. Now, Amalia Castillo León, she's very important. And she went to the Chapultepec meeting in 1945. And with Minerva Bernardino, she was able to have the Inter-American Women's Commission to be part the OAS, the Organization of American States. These women were very important, with a Brazilian woman as well. In the creation of the Commission on Women's Status, 1947. That commission, which is still there, it is very important in the United Nations in terms of equality of women in countries, legislations, in terms of education, work, civil labor rights, and the family environment as well. This is a positive work for peace. It is extraordinary work. Well, these women, we have to thank the creation of the different institutions they formed. They opened new paths, and they worked to accomplish their participation in legislations.
Lo hemos llamado nombrar a las que no fueron nombradas.
Haiti, naming the women that were not named. And this is in the 20s, and this means abusing the bodies of women. There was no way for the legislation to have justice.
In 1926, there was organized a mission to see what happens in that country. And then, in this mission, women from Haiti were there, and the history is from wealth. The history is from wealth. Nobody was talking about them. They only say women from Haiti. And we have thought that it's important that we should all have a name. So if there's a commission of our, an observation commission has what used to be called a mission of peace that goes to Haiti with Emily Greenbaum, that was Secretary General. We wanted to know also who were the women that would welcoming them, that were Eugene Sylvain, Alice Garut, Mary Church Terrell. They were the women that have really started a movement in Haiti against occupation. They decided that it was important to send a commission to the United States in order to report what was going on. And they went and they gathered money throughout the different towns in order to send that commission. Also, Mary Church Terrell that I have mentioned, that was pretty much one of the few African Americans in the United States that helped the women in Haiti and supported them. Last, they were able to send the mission, but that report from occupied Haiti had an influence in the United States, changing their outlook with respect to the occupation and to just abandon that after some time. You can see middle-class women that participated. They respond to the pattern that we mentioned. There's a case of racism that we could mention. In this case, we have Mary Church Terrell from the International League of Women, requested in a letter to remove the Black soldiers from Germany. And this Black women, Mary Church Terrell says no way, because they said that they were accusing Black men from raping white women. No, and then she says, I belong to this race. We have been raped by white, by Black. And I do not agree that the statement is that Black men are the ones that rape women. So she raised her voice. Last, so we have some time. We have to say that women in Haiti would reorganize their feminist movement. The children, the daughters of these founding women. And I cannot talk about other countries, but I will show you some pictures like in Colombia. I'm not going to go and explain in detail the cases. The Mandate for Peace, Ofelia Uribe de Acosta, Lucila Rubio de la Verde, that has been studied by Lola Geluna, Paulina Gomez, that along with Mabel Vernon from the United States, they were in charge of a program that's called Mandate to the Peoples for Peace. These women are, their information has been gathered in a book that is a result of all the research by myself as well. And last, the case of Berta Lutz, a woman from Brazil that participated in the International Networks for Peace. And you can see her in the conference in San Francisco, where we know that the letter or the Charter for Human Rights was created. I can tell you that to be on the screen, it's something that gets you very tired. It's very burdensome. And I can tell you that from our conviction that what's personal is political, we need to underscore the importance of these networks and relationships between women in the world. And we're active, and this Congress is just a sample of this, because even today, the network of relationships and acknowledgement among us, the support being acknowledged in the middle of diversity, conflict resolution, intelligence, compassion, to be here, to be practical in order to face conflicts, in order to move forward, to improve the situation of the world. That's our main strength. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Carmen.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you so much. Dr. Carmen Magayon and Dr. Sandra Blasco for their presentation. Now we're going to have some time for questions. If somebody wants to ask a question, you want to send the question and we will send it to them.
Estás silenciada.
Sí, bueno, por un lado nos pone Cintia Casarrubias, que muchas gracias por toda
Cynthia
esta...
Casarrubias says, thank you very much for all of this information that has been shared so generously. I don't know if there are any questions in YouTube or here, if you want to share your questions.
No se preocupe, doctora Elvia, porque
It's okay, Dr. Elvia, because when you talk for so long, it might be our fault, but it's very difficult to have questions. Maybe if we have motivate them to read, that would be wonderful. We have a question by Carmen Diaz from ITESU. If Carmen can talk about what she stated as attitude of intelligent compassion that allows for conflict solving or conflict management. This is very interesting, but you need to read the book by Katia Cecilia Confortini. Intelligence with compassion. You can imagine is the effort of putting yourself in the same place as the other person in the conflict. Promote for being in the different positions of conflict, not to worsen things with bad words or bad movements or with questions and things that might not allow you to move forward with creative solutions and so on, mediations by other women, in some cases even get to rupture or distancing. That just simply is the will to manage conflict and to know that the truth is not necessarily there. That would be an important contribution, that we would need to go deeper, education for peace, and also we look into how to manage conflict in order to do that win-win. It's not about you win, I lose. No. So we have seen this type of attitudes. That doesn't mean that we're better. No. They're women and that go through things that are very painful and that they're not allowed, and they can't get ahead sometimes.
Cintia Casarrubias, y por favor.
Cintia Casarrubias wants to know if you can tell us who wrote the book that you mentioned. I'm going to write it down. Katia Cecilia Confortini. Katia Confortini. Intelligent Compassion. It's in English. It's not has not been translated. Maybe Mexico that translates a lot more than we do. We've read a lot of authors through Mexico. I want to say all this history that might seem too long, it's important that we really take feminism and color it with all of these things about peacemaking. We want to be treated the same as men. We have seen, you know, all the weapons, all the noise, and Some women think that that's the path. No, let's take back our history and how we wanted to be equal, and to paint feminism with this notions of peace, that is peace against war and for the rights, for the right.
Gracias, Carmen. Nos preguntan en YouTube, ¿podría expandir
Thank you, Carmen. And they're asking, can you go deeper with respect to the implications of the position of liberal feminism and anti-capitalism? And
Yes.
thanks for the conference. If at any point of in your intervention you have mentioned the role of women for peace building from the armed forces? With respect to the first one, the liberal feminism, that was also an area, a different area that would allow peace building feminists, a liberal feminism that is more based in attitudes that are looking for friendship, good relationships, building friendship among women, anti-imperialist, and all. This has happened and continues to happen. Among other efforts later on, I'm thinking about women, Jewish women, and the women from Palestine. The ones from Israel would meet with us, all the pacifists, all the feminists that used to say. They would join us, they would gather with us to sleep at night, and we would be with them so they wouldn't sleep at night. They wanted a more political standing, more from Palestine, not from the occupation, and the ones from Israel, they wanted to be friends. And somehow, this is in this speech, what's important to move forward together, to listen, to think that both things can be together, can survive together, can help each other.
Muchísimas gracias, Carmen.
Thank you, Carmen.
No sé si
I
hay
believe, I don't know if there are any other questions. I believe that there are no more questions in YouTube. And I don't think we have any more in the chat. I'm sorry. With respect to armed forces, is that back then the access to armed forces was closed as such, so that feminism about going into armed forces we have not seen. We know that women follow the armies, and you know that in Mexican Revolution there were women that started using weapons. And in the same pacifist feminism, we have not looked at this women that make peace, that make war, but it helps us to look at this and for us, it has a lot of value to defend the causes with no violence, in the sense of philosophy about using diplomacy in order to reach different actions. Yes. Thank you, Carmen. We want to thank you. Congratulations from your presentation. How to solve the situation that violence sometimes seems to be the only way that you can be heard. Our colleague from Alvejar University. I believe that there's no more questions, and we know that, as Carmen says, is very tiresome to be in front of the screen. We want to thank you, Dr. Santablas, Dr. Carmen Magayon, and it's always a pleasure to listen to you. You give us a lot of ideas of where to continue researching about this genealogy, to look everything, these women that have been working for peace at the international level. And we're going to close this panel, and we're going to get ready for the next panel, coordinated by ITESU, by Carmen Diaz. And thank you. We send you our greetings, and in this virtual world, we're going to send you your certificates as speakers. Sandra and Carmen, thank you, and we'll see you in the next panel.